Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Samuel Hines, former Prime Minister of Guyana, honorable members of Parliament, His Excellency, Ambassador of the Russian Federation, and Charge Affairs of the Embassy of Chile. If you do have other representatives of the diplomatic corps, welcome. Esteemed members of the head table, special invitees, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to bid you a very, very warm welcome to this afternoon's public forum on the topic, A New Global Human Order. And I repeat, a new global human order. One may ask the question, why a new global human order? What is wrong with the current global human order? Let's think about it for a second, and you'll think of one thing that comes right away. If we were not in an air-conditioned room, we would have all been sweating as we're walking inside. We're feeling the effects of climate change on a daily basis. That is one very wrong thing that's happening with the current global human order. But I'm jumping the gun a little bit here. Let me just touch very, very briefly on one or two aspects of the current order. Why, as I pose the question, why do we need a new order? What is wrong with the old one? Why is it we need a new order? I will not get into the details, but our panelists will inform you, will educate you on that. However, permit me to say that the current global order and the global order that has been existing in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 decades, or in fact, as far as I can recall, is highly lopsided. It's deficient. It's unjust. It's unfair. It's inhuman. To the world's overwhelming majority, I would say it is very, very unfair. It is outright destructive to humanity. In one word, I would say it's wrong. It does not provide a better life for human beings, for the population of our planet. And one might ask further then, what is really wrong with it? Why do you say it's lopsided? Why do you say it's unjust? And these are not my findings. These are findings of the United Nations, findings of the World Economic Forum, of the International Monetary Fund, of the World Bank, of international NGOs, and of course of governments and experts, etc. That the world, a few people in the world is getting richer, while the overwhelming majority of the people in the world getting poorer. In other words, the income gap is widening, the rich getting richer, and you know, we've been hearing this for a long time, and we're still hearing it, but it's getting worse. That's the problem. It is getting worse. The rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. The income gap is widening. In spite of all the developmental works and all the billions of dollars that are being invested by the United Nations system, by the World Bank, by the bilateral cooperation agencies, by the technical cooperation agencies, by the NGOs, and you know, there is this donor fatigue basically because everybody wants money to get involved in development. But what's the result? The result is that 1% of the world population owns over 50% of the global wealth. 1%. Yes? And the rest of the world, the rest of the population, have access to about 10%. So you can imagine that's the first thing that is wrong, because it was not so, but it was 48% 2 years ago. This year, it is already 50% of wealth that is owned by 1% of the world population. The poorest of the poor controls less than 10%, as I said, of the global wealth. And this inequality is expressed not only at the global level, not only between or among, I should say, states and countries, it's also within countries. This inequality, this imbalance in the division and distribution of income is widening within countries. And the most affected regions are Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean. Also, this gap is widening between the North and the South. And as I said before, what is very, very worrying is that we are spending more and more resources on so-called quote-unquote development. Where do the benefits go? That is what we have to ask. This inequality is also experienced in opportunities. Those who have access to opportunities are restricted, limited. Access to social services, vital social services, is getting worse and worse. Let's think about it. By, let me see, this is 2016, so it will be 34 years from now, about 2050. The world population will increase by about 2.3 billion. What are we going to do then? If we continue with this same trend, the same framework that we have for development, the same models we are using today, what can we expect? What will our children expect? Our grandchildren? The future looks very bleak, very, very bleak. And as I said before, those affected most are the poorest of the poor, vulnerable groups, women, children, indigenous peoples, displaced persons, refugees, asylum seekers, migrants. And speaking of the latter category, by the way, refugees, migrants, displaced persons, etc., there is chaos in the world in terms of conflicts. The Middle East is in turmoil. North Africa, Libya, Egypt, several countries in in Africa, in the continent of Africa, are also bogged down with ethnic strife, civil strife, Afghanistan, and it can go on and on. Who benefits from all of this? One thing comes to my mind, at least, and that is those who make and sell arms, the military-industrial complex. They're the ones who benefit the most, because without wars, who would they sell these arms to? And then, of course, people get sick because of extreme poverty. You have epidemics, you have Zika at the moment, then there was Ebola, then there was bird flu, and then there was, all the doctors will tell you, all the epidemics that have been taking place. Who benefits from that? People die, but the pharmaceutical industry, they are the ones who make the most money because they have to sell drugs. And those are the ones who lobby, who spend billions of dollars lobbying the United States government and the UK government and the governments in the EU. They lobby. And they spend billions of dollars on these lobbies to be able to get legislation that would benefit them. That's the kind of world we're living in today. Nobody really, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but those who have the wealth do not think of the poor. They think about how to get richer on a daily basis. And of course, I said before, extreme weather conditions have affected lives and livelihoods mostly of the poor people, those who depend on their cash crops. Those who live in the villages have no access to water. It's climate change is threatening our planet, our very existence. And of course, there are so many vulnerabilities that we're experiencing, too many to enumerate at this point in time. But the question arises as to what should we do? What should we do, considering that we have all of these problems? What we should do you will be informed by our distinguished speakers at the head table. The presenters will talk about the new global human order. The new global human order was the brainchild of no other than the late president of Guyana and the father of our nation and the leader of the People's Progressive Party, Dr. Cheddi Jagan. He was a visionary thinker who not only talked the talk, but walked the walk. And so, with these few introductory words, I'm going to pass you on to our speakers, but before I do that, I must apologize on behalf of His Excellency Ambassador Rudy Insanali, who really wanted to be here, but unfortunately he got a little bit under the weather last evening and couldn't be with us, but he did send his very best wishes for a successful forum. And Comrade Lawrence Rodney, popularly known as Edney Rodney, has kindly agreed to join us. Eddie is a political activist, has been one for longest while. He has been he's a journalist and has been practicing journalism for over 15 years with the Mirror newspaper. He's a former member of the Central Committee of the PPP. He's a member of the Guyana Agricultural and General Workers Union. And last but definitely not least, the brother of the late Dr. Walter Rodney. Eddie, may I ask you to the podium, please? Thank you.
Have you tried a new taste of Western fried chicken lately? Added flavor, marinated with rich seasonings and fresh ingredients, pressure fried to lock in the taste. Western fried buffalo wings, chicken strips and more. So take a bite into the good stuff today. Three convenient locations to serve you. Call the numbers on your screen for home delivery.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for those very kind and I hope encouraging remarks. Committee Chairperson, members of the panel, Bishop, General Secretary. First of all, let me express my own gratitude for being invited, even at short notice, to participate in this, what I believe is a historical program. Historical in the sense that it's the first time unless my memory doesn't serve me correct, that a forum such as this has been held at the National Library. There have been several over the years, events, mainly at the Chedijagan Research Center and sometimes at Freedom House. And I think it was also one sometime at another forum, but not at a library. So in that sense, it is historical. I read some time ago that there is a course being offered at the library now in the Russian language, and I see the Russian embassy diplomats are here. I think it's appropriate that they're here. I hope that this particular project gets going, because I think the more Guyanese who learn not only Russian, but foreign languages in particular. Chedijagan was one of those who made sure that he sent cadres, young cadres, on trips abroad so that they could gain language skills. Now, I think that it is opposite, that the new global human order has occupied a centerpiece as we go into the beginning of September. As you all know, the United Nations General Assembly will meet for its 2016 session soon. I don't want to say what date, because I'm not a diplomat. But when the United Nations General Assembly meets, they will have as part of their agenda the new global human order, which was adopted some years ago after intensive, I should say labor-intensive lobbying on the part not of Dr. Jagan so much, because he had died by that time, but by Guyana's honored representative, including Dr. Insinali, who unfortunately cannot be here this evening. So, with those introductory comments, I would just like to say, first of all, that it may have been coincidental that in 1995, when Dr. Jagan endorsed, he addressed the World Summit Conference in Copenhagen, Denmark. The endorsement of the then known International Global Human Order, it was known then as the International Global Human Order, was also the occasion for a consensus for another Guyanese initiative. In other words, the International Global Human Order was one initiative of Dr. Jagan, but there were others. Dr. Jagan's initiative was not a standalone process. It was a comprehensive strategy designed to project not only a new world order, but a demand for a new kind of social partnership. It was the end of the Cold War, and there were signs, clear signs, that the leading superpower at the time, the United States, was embarked on aggrandizement, expansion in Iraq, certain other parts of the Middle East, supporting Israel, and in general, behaving like a nuclear bully. Dr. Jagan rejected this premise, and this was one of the rationale, one of the factors that led to his formulating the new global order, or the International Global Human Order. The other initiative dealt with adaptation of forests. In other words, the argument or the proposal or the idea was that countries like Guyana could not have forest resources and allow these resources just to remain idle. There had to be some formulation whereby these resources could be put to economic use. And Dr. Jagan, together with the then minister, I think it was not Dr. Rohit, then Foreign Secretary, led the charge for the adaptation strategy for Guyana's forests. That latter initiative was also linked, connected to another set of world community proposals that came out of the Rio Summit of 1991. So we had the Rio Summit of 1991, which at that time the PPP was not in office. We had the International New Global Order of 1994. And we had in 1995 the adaptation of forest strategy, which Dr. Jagan elaborated together with other advisors. And it was being led, the charge was being led at that time by the Foreign Affairs Minister, Mr. Rohit Kamzoli. In terms of advocacy, the NGHO, therefore, was considered in tandem with environmental strategies and ideas that were limiting the development and growth of countries such as Guyana. Countries in the South, countries in the Caribbean, countries in the Latin American arm. These were the countries that at that time were most affected by environmental damage. You may recall that at one time there was a campaign that Dr. Jagan was part of to make the Caribbean zone free of waste. In other words, vessels from Europe and elsewhere denied ports of entry in other countries filled with nuclear waste were coming to the Caribbean. And Dr. Jagan took a stand against that practice. It is important that we distinguish between environmental threats to the environment and development. We must distinguish between these two. Dr. Jagan made the point that whatever we do, we must also have the involvement of the people. The people have to be empowered. If you didn't empower the people, then your whole strategy became lopsided. And it wasn't very much different from what was being advocated as a New World Order by George Bush Sr. That is to say, the father of George Bush II. So a distinction has to be made. The new global human order, therefore, grew out of an international concern, an international division of labor that was at various levels supportive of what had become formulations at the United Nations. Formulations such as Development Decade or Decades, Development Decade for Africa, Development Decade for Third World countries, Development Decades for all developing countries, and then leading into what was now just being completed, the Millennium Decade of 2015. So the new global order then, I don't want to repeat myself, was not just an idea that Dr. Jagan just thought of. It was something that he analyzed, he examined, he researched. And after he had researched, and it was quite certain that he was on solid ground, then he set about to craft and design the new global human order. In fact, the NGHO originally was published. Go to Jamaica, the whole of Jamaica today is talking about boat. But Usain Bolt has brought its labor. Money from television, money from endorsements, money from advertisements. So these are ideas that we should not exclude as we go forward with the new global order. Because we're speaking about a new humanity, about a new humankind, where culture, sport, art, everything to do with human development becomes very, very important. Indeed, at a given point in time, as we're seeing in Jamaica, even now, with the acceptance of an IMF diktat, the Jamaican people feel encouraged by the fact that Usain Bolt has put Jamaica on the map. He's put Jamaica on the map, and Jamaicans can earn a raise. So, Chairman, the direct involvement of experienced seniors. This is another area, especially seniors who have medical experience, because it's from this pool of experience we were able to solve problems such as Zika, such as, for example, the epidemic that hit West Africa. These are areas we need to look at. For example, here in Guyana, we have the specialty hospital. The specialty hospital is a tremendous proposal, idea for tourism for health purposes. We could move in the same area as India and Cuba and some republics in the former Soviet Union to provide tourism for health purposes. So these are areas. I've identified 4, 5, or 6 others, but I don't want to elaborate further on those. All I wish to say now is that the new global order is not something that is static. It changes as the international capitalist system transforms itself, as it goes through new crises, as it creates refugees, as we get Brexit, as we get hate crimes. These are all areas that Dr. Jacob analyzed. Of course, he wasn't able to see Brexit. He wasn't able to see attacks on Pakistanis as they are now. But he was able to understand that without a transformation of the relationship between the rich countries and the poor countries, the crisis could never be solved. Thank you very much.
Superfoods brings quality dairy to your home. The highest protein and the creamiest taste with calcium and vitamins A, D, and E. Keep your family smiling with our full cream Milko milk powder made from 100% pasteurized milk. Our Milko milk powder is high quality Fonterra milk powder. Now available in smaller packages. Enjoy the high quality and great taste. Call Superfoods, located at 8 Rumfeld Industrial Estate. Call 223-1034 or 223-1035.
Thank you, Eddie, for that very informative presentation. Indeed, the new global human order is not a static document. In fact, it's a framework that is evolving every day, every week, every year as we move along. And it will continue to change, as you said, as circumstances change. But there was one aspect of what Eddie said that really got my attention, and that is putting people at the center of development. This is what the new global human order is about, putting people at the center of development. And it reminded me of one little, I wouldn't say incident, but something happened that really embarrassed me. I was working with in the United Nations system for some years, and there was a seminar, I would say, or a workshop, I can't remember, a workshop on future plans for the organization I was working for, that agency of the UN that I was working for. And I kept hearing, I was a participant, and I kept hearing things like business plans, management issues, marketing strategies, and so on and so on. And of course, me being young, of course not so young as I am now, I just blurted out, I said, I mean, it's good to hear all of this, but I'm not hearing anything about people in all of this. Where are the stakeholders, the beneficiaries in all this big plan that we're developing? Everyone looked at me as if I was growing horns, but it's unfortunate. I think it's just symptomatic of everywhere else, that when you're talking of this big development agenda, sometimes, and a lot of times, we seem to forget what it's all about. It's all about people. It's all about people, and especially the poor people, the vulnerable people. We forget about that. This is what the new global human order seeks to correct and to redirect, to put people always at the center of development. Our next presenter is someone who is no stranger to you, Bishop Juan Edghill. Bishop Edghill was the former chairman of the Guyana Post Office Corporation. He was also former head of the Ethnic Relations Commission. He was former minister within the Minister of Finance. He is currently a member of Parliament and sits in several parliamentary committees. Therefore, you can see from his background that he has a wealth of information, a wealth of experience, and a lot to share with us on the new global human order from his perspective. Bishop Edghill, may I ask you to report?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. Former Prime Minister and former President, Comrade Sanders Hines, distinguished panelists at the head table, excellencies from both Russia and Chile, leadership of the People's Progressive Party and MPs, ladies and gentlemen, friends, members of the media. I'm extremely happy to be sharing this table or podium with my colleagues this afternoon as we discuss this very important subject of the new global human order. When the General Secretary spoke to me about participating and I learned about who will be the other panelists, I considered myself very worthy and privileged to have been asked to participate. Dr. Rudy Inchinali, who should have been here and because of ill health is not here, was the particular person who took the resolution to the United Nations. And I thought, well, apart from sharing and speaking, I will have an opportunity to learn quite a lot. But I must tell you, I did feel a little nervous. What can I say? What can I contribute in this particular environment? And it reminded me of the story of the Derby, the race of all the big horses who were getting set for the Derby. And there showed up at the starting line a little donkey. And all the important people and the bettors and the handlers were asking the donkey, "What are you doing there? You can't win anything." And the donkey looked at them and he replied and he says, "But I'll be able to say something that you cannot say. I've been with the best." So this afternoon, I can certainly say, having listened to Eddie Rodney and all the rest, I can be able to go home this afternoon and say I've been with the best in this discussion. But colleagues, I'd like to bring my own perspective and a simple approach. The fact that Dr. Jagan spoke about a new global human order, it had to be that there was a recognition at that time that other approaches needed to be examined, or there must be another approach to the way we look at our world, the way in which we view things, and the way in which we implement actions. And I have found this to be correct because in his writings to the World Hearings on Development, which was a paper for the United Nations sponsored World Hearing on Development, June 6 to 10, 1994, Dr. Jagan had these words to say: "The agenda for development must elaborate a new strategy for development, which must take into account theory, ideology, and appropriate practice based upon historical experience, a scientific worldview, and a concrete analysis of regional and national specifics and peculiarities." It is clear that Dr. Jagan was advocating questions must be asked. Answers and theories must be proffered, and there should be a wide discussion. And this discussion must take place within a particular context. And we will see as we go along. So in order for us to be able to consider this new global human order, there must be an acceptance that there is a need for a new look at development. Eddie Rodney spoke a little bit about that, so I don't want to go further for the sake of time. It means that a process must be agreed on that will allow for the crystallization of this approach. And in this process, there must be a key pillar. All players must be at the table. It cannot be just some that are dictating to the rest. We must be able to have all players at the table. I have discovered from my own reading that in the conceptualizing of the work of Dr. Jagan as he articulated it as a new global human order, the inseparable twin of peace and development must be examined in the context of present global realities with human needs, human security, human beings and their welfare at its center. Our chairperson articulated that by saying it must be people. People must be at the center of this developmental approach. This approach must embrace representative, consultative, and participatory democracy. I want to read again from the introduction in the book, A New Global Human Order, the words of Dr. Cherry Jagan. Economic growth, I quote, economic growth is necessary for the satisfaction of basic needs and human development. As much as human development is necessary for economic growth, there's a nexus between poverty, hunger, famine, malnutrition, hopelessness, illiteracy, disease, population explosion, environmental degradation, migration, narcotics production, use and trafficking, and crime. Human development and the protection of the environment are closely linked. There will be no protection of the environment if the boundaries of poverty continue to expand. Change is necessary. The trickle-down process under monopoly capitalism is not working. Instead, the rich are getting richer at the expense of the poor, and the gap between the developed and developing countries is ever widening. Now, words of Dr. Jagan then, and I'm sure for the young in the room, we will recognize its relevance even today, 2016, and as we go towards the various developmental agendas that are being articulated by the United Nations. It therefore means, from my conclusion, after an examination of the material that is available, that the new global human order envisages the following. Number one, there must be relationships among states that are based on mutual respect. A genuine partnership must be established, and this partnership must be based upon dialogue and cooperation. So if we're going to develop a new global human order, the way the world operates and engages must be based upon a society where there is mutual respect and in an environment of partnership. It means that the walls that have been established between the industrialized world and the third world, when we get to the table of discussion, it must be based upon mutual respect. And that was the thinking of Dr. Jagan as he articulated this concept. Secondly, a new global human order envisages that there are recognizable consequences of the disparities that exist. And if they continue unchecked, it will be dangerous for all of us. And a new global human order is a call, a clarion call for us to be able to examine these disparities and do something about it. Dr. Jagan, in a letter sent to world leaders on May 1st, 1994, had these words to say: "We must resolve to reverse the gap which has been developing between the richest and the poorest countries. The divisions between the rich and the poor in the industrialized societies in the north and the developing and underprivileged societies in the south, as well as the distance in attainment between the north and the south, have been widening considerably since the early 1980s. In the north, the consequences of these disparities have been unemployment, homelessness, urban disorder, increasing crime, especially among the youth, the rise of ultra-right movements, strident nationalism, and fragmentation accompanied by racism and ethnic tensions. In the South, the consequences of these divisions have been the increase in crime and disease, hopelessness, emigration, environmental degradation, and the illegal traffic and use of narcotic drugs. So in this call for the development of this new global human order, there was a recognition that if these disparities that existed remained unchecked, there are consequences both for the countries in the north and there are consequences for the countries in the south. And of course, Dr. Jagan's articulating of those consequences did not paint a very gloomy picture. It provided the reality. And I dare say, even as we stand here in 2016, advocating for the continual discussion on this new global human order, these consequences are more real now as they were then, as envisaged by the visionary of this call, Dr. Chetty Jagan. The gap must be closed between the rich and the poor, and everything possible, everything humanly possible must be done to close that gap. Number 3, a new global human order envisages that there must be practical approaches to deal with this dilemma that I will want to describe as ever-increasing poverty. It was Dr. Jagan's belief that if left unattended, the expansion of poverty with hunger will undermine the fabric and security of the democratic state. Dealing with this issue of poverty was something that needed to be addressed. A coordinated approach is also required in this proposition of a new global human order. It requires governments as well as non-governmental organizations, international institutions, and all other stakeholders. There must be a collaboration. And Dr. Jagan advocated in his writings that there is a role for the state as well as the private sector. Fourthly, the new global human order envisages that human development is vital for economic growth. You cannot have economic growth without human development. I want to stay away from the politics of our day, but I can't help lamenting that if this concept is taken into account in Guyana today, the slowdown that we are currently experiencing could have been avoided. Because when we advocate policies, measures, and programs, it must not just be about getting the numbers correct in your budget cycle, or to ensure that your indicators are looking good for reports to IMF missions when they visit. It must be that development is coming to the ordinary man and woman in the street, in the villages, in the office, and in the factory. And we must relate to this approach in that manner. Human development is vital to economic growth. So Dr. Jagan was very strong in his advocacy as it relates to dealing with the issue of debt and the debt burden. And he had a lot to say, of which I want to share with us some this afternoon. Dr. Jagan, in his paper, The Quest for Peace, Justice, and Development, which was presented in the United Nations General Assembly to mark the 50th anniversary of the UN body, had these words to say: Third world debt is strangling our reconstruction and human development efforts. Although we paid more than 1.3 trillion US dollars between 1982 and 1990, yet our countries were 61% more in debt in 1990 than they were in 1982. During the same period, there was a net south to north outflow of 418 billion US dollars, not including outflows such as royalties, dividends, and repatriated profits. Excuse me. Underpaid raw materials, etc. A sum equal to 6 Marshall Plans, the plan which provided aid to Europe at the end of World War II. At the same time, our third world countries lose annually about 500 billion US dollars in unfair, non-equivalent international trade, a sum equal to 10 times ODA assistance from developed countries. This unjust economic order must be replaced by a just new global human order for international and individual security and peace. The human development paradigm must be established on the basis of empowerment of our peoples, accountability, productivity, and sustainability. Very strong words as we look towards understanding this whole concept that the debt burden that has really strangulated third world countries have really hindered our development. In our own case, Guyana, at the time of 1992, when the PPP Civic came to office, one of the greatest challenges that the Jagan administration was faced with, and I think that informed his thinking and his advocacy around the world, was debt servicing. So much money had to be used to service debt that there was not enough to really bring development to our people, whether it was in terms of the social services or in terms of infrastructure that will provide a pathway for a better life for our people. Dr. Jagan again speaking as it relates to debt burden, as he addressed the conference on a new global order which was hosted in Georgetown, Guyana, had these words to say: debt stultifies development. It leads to underdevelopment. This in turn leads to unemployment, underemployment, poverty, and family disintegration, hunger, illiteracy, juvenile delinquency, crime, suicide, and emigration. The world debtor countries paid more than 1.3 trillion between 1982 and 1990. And he repeated what he had said earlier. Yet in 1990, they were 61% more in debt than they were in 1982. Since the early 1980s, Latin America and the Caribbean countries have honored their debt obligations at tremendous suffering of the masses of the people. Yet the debt continues to grow. The IMF and the international financial institutions were more concerned about structural adjustment programs that limited the amount of money that was paid to wages and salaries and human development because they wanted to ensure that you service debt. So in that vicious cycle, a heavily indebted country would have been living just to pay debt. And that is why we need to have a new human global order that changes that paradigm, where those inequities and disparities are rearranged with a new look at the world, at how we look at our people and their welfare. Ladies and gentlemen, as I close, I would like to suggest a few things as we continue this discussion, because like Brother Rodney said, the new global human order is not a static document, it's a work in progress. And even the resolution at the United Nations called for countries and experts to continue to make their contribution towards this discourse. A new thinking must emerge. Here in Guyana and around the world, there must be a new thinking about how we approach the world. Ladies and gentlemen, there are things that wealth and riches that our chairperson alluded to earlier, where 1% of the world embraces that magnitude of those resources. When there are dire effects in the world, they are not escaped from it. For example, if there's an outbreak of malaria, and it happens in poor countries, the rich countries are not absolved because of their wealth from these consequences. So we must be able to have a new thinking about how we approach this. I think it was Mr. Wilkinson, if I have his name correct, from the World Bank, IMF, who said that countries don't need more charity. What they need is more opportunities. And I bring this to our attention to indicate that in order to facilitate development in the globe today, that we don't just need aid. Aid has its important role. But aid must only be one aspect of that approach. Countries must be able to be provided with opportunities that allow for development and that space that will create betterment for human beings. So aid must never destroy the dignity of its recipients. I believe that poverty can be eradicated. I believe that inequalities can be remedied. I believe that sufferings can be lessened. I believe that women and youth can be mainstreamed in the developmental process. I believe that North-South, South-South cooperation can be deepened with obvious benefits to all of our people. And I would dare say, if you think that I'm dreaming, I'm not the only one. Because the visionary and the person who advocated this discussion at the highest level on the world stage for a new global human order share those thoughts and beliefs. And I believe as we continue to have this discussion, we certainly can see a better world that we all can be proud to call our home. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Eat fresh at Subs and Salads today. Over 12 tasty sub sandwiches to choose from. All the favorite fillings and toppings you can possibly think of. Made fresh every day. Personalize yours today. Our footlongs are a treat. More meat, more toppings on a well-baked bun. Our Caesar salads are amazing with the best ranch dressings. So let your next stop be Subs and Salads on Sheriff Street, Regent Street, and Grove on the east bank of Demerara. Subs and Salads. Eat fresh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bishop Etchell. That was indeed a remarkable synopsis of this booklet called by Dr. Jagan. It's articles, writings of Dr. Jagan on the new global human order, which you can purchase at Michael Ford Bookshop. That's below Freedom House. And also, he expanded on his own thoughts on the future of the NGHO. Bishop Etchell also mentioned that, and what Eddie said earlier, it's not a static phenomenon, it is not a static concept, it is continuously evolving. And I would just like to say that the first time it was introduced to the United Nations General Assembly by Ambassador Rudy Nsanali was in the year 2000, and a resolution was adopted, Resolution 55/48 in the year 2000. Then again, this was further revised and developed and received even wider support in 2002, then in 2007, then in 2010, and all, in every instance, the resolution is being renewed, new aspects are being added, changes are being made according to the circumstances of the day, and wider and wider, and it was getting wider and wider support. And in 2012 as well, there was a resolution 67, and in 2013 there was a informal thematic debate on the subject of inequality, and ECOSOC reported on that debate. And also in 2014, another resolution was unanimously adopted by consensus, a resolution 69 at the United Nations General Assembly, and it is again on the agenda of this session, the 71st session of the United Nations, that is currently going on, or will start soon, I think, at the United Nations headquarters. So you can see that it is evolving, not as it was in the year 2000, but it is gaining more momentum, it is gaining more support, and it is being updated, and it is getting, how you should say, wider and wider acceptance throughout the world. And I would like now to call on the person who has been with this process from its inception. When the NGHO, the talk of the NGHO started, he was there. In fact, he wrote, this is the second edition of this booklet, he wrote the foreword of the first edition and the foreword of the second edition. He had discussions with Dr. Jagan on how they're going to proceed, how to articulate the thoughts, and he will tell you all of that. Comrade Clement James Roby, as long as I can remember, has been an executive member of the People's Progressive Party and still is. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, subsequently the Minister of, after democracy was returned in 1992, I should say, became Minister of Foreign Affairs. He then became Minister of Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation, I believe that's how the ministry was called. And then he held the unenviable position, I would say, of Minister of Home Affairs. He's currently a Member of Parliament and the General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party. It is my pleasure and honor to request Comrade Roby to address you.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, other members of the panel, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the diplomatic corps, and others who are present here this evening. We thought that it would be useful to have this forum to discuss this very important matter, precisely because in this 64th session of the United Nations General Assembly, the new Global Human Order resolution, as pointed out by the chairperson, is on the agenda for discussion. And how can an important matter like this be on the agenda for discussion at the highest international forum of the world, where world leaders will be meeting, as they do every year, and the country that has proposed that this matter be on the agenda remains silent? trade. It cannot be. And therefore, we felt it was necessary to intensify our work in order to raise public awareness and sensitization at the national level on the subject which Guyana, not the People's Progressive Party, because parties are not allowed to put resolutions at the United Nations. It's the country. This resolution was sponsored first and foremost by Guyana. But you know the United Nations is the United Nations, nations of the world. And so, as the originator of this resolution, and as was pointed out, the fact that this resolution gained acclamation at the General Assembly level and at ECOSOC level, that is the United Nations Economic Commission for Economic and Social Development Council. It meant that the countries of the world, both in the north and the south, found some attachment. It resonated with many countries of the world at the United Nations. And that is how this resolution is where it is today on the agenda of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Guyana, being the initiator of this resolution, even though there's a change of government now, it doesn't matter, because the resolution is there in the name of Guyana. And in fact, it's not no longer a Guyana resolution, it's a resolution of 100 and something countries. Because in a multilateral setting, this is the setting that exists within the United Nations, unless you have countries together on an issue, it's not going anywhere. And multilateral negotiations require more than one country to come together, more than one like-minded country. Because the countries have to be like-minded to be supportive of a resolution of this type. They have to, in other words, see eye to eye. Of course, the resolution, as it goes forward, there are different changes, different adaptations, and so forth. You have things like human security, food security, all these patterns and tendencies influencing the resolution. But the fact of the matter is, it has life. It is still alive within the body of the United Nations. So it is not coincidental. In fact, this is very much a calculated move that we find it necessary to organize a forum like this to bring a greater degree of sensitization to this concept that originated before the change of government in our country. That's number one. Number two, we found it necessary to put a question in the National Assembly recently, that is, a question without notice, which is allowed for in parliamentary procedure, to ask the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Carl Williams, what is the position of his government in respect of this resolution that is coming up for debate in the UNGA. We have to ask the question because it's a new government. And it's a new government that will take its seat at the United Nations when this matter comes up for debate. And so it is only natural that you would want to know, is the government going to carry on with this resolution? You're not going to sit and let the resolution die on an important matter like this that has attracted the attention of over 100 countries. And by the way, it's not something easy at the United Nations to have more than 100 countries supporting a matter that you had initiated. So we are not prepared to drop the ball. And so we put a question in the Parliament to ask Mr. Greenwich, Sir, Honourable Member, what is the position of your government? The Minister, of course, he started out by saying, oh, you know, the resolution has been overtaken by time. It has outlived its usefulness. So you see, the question was very important to put the question, because if he didn't put the question, you would have never heard that. But then, as the members of Parliament on our side began to raise question after question in relation to the said matter, the Minister then changed his tune and said that they will continue to pursue the resolution. Now, I have written Mr. Greenwich quite some months before, asking him, or first of all informing him, that this resolution is coming up for debate in the General Assembly. I had written him in May. We had Parliament when? In August. And I had written him since May, alerting him that this resolution is coming up and we would like to know what is Government of Guyana's position. It was only after we had the debate in the Parliament on the subject that he then sent off a letter to me. So you see the importance of asking questions in the Parliament. Had we not asked the question in Parliament, I doubt whether I would have received this letter. And this is what the letter says. Dear Secretary General, I'm in receipt of your letter dated May the 13th, 2016 on the subject of UN Resolution 629/202, quote, the role of the United Nations in promoting a new global human order, end of quote, which was initiated at the United Nations by Guyana. He goes on, please be assured that the government of Guyana will continue to pursue this issue as we move forward in our developmental strategy, both bilaterally and multilaterally. Good news, at least on paper. I don't want to sound cynical, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I would say it's good news, at least on paper, that according to the Foreign Minister of Guyana, B. Greenwich, they are prepared to take this resolution forward as a country. And that's good for us. But we should not rest on our laurels. We should not allow complacency to step in and just say, oh, the government is going to take it forward, that's it. We went a step further. We wrote to every Minister of Foreign Affairs and every head of government in CARICOM. We sent letters to them. We attached a copy of the resolution to every Foreign Minister of CARICOM and every head of government in CARICOM, informing them that this resolution is coming up for debate in the General Assembly. This is what we call being proactive on a matter that is close to us. We have begun receiving some letters of acknowledgement that our letter has been received and that it will be given due consideration. That's good enough. It's diplomatic language. We didn't expect them to go into too many details about what they will do from what they wouldn't do. Thank you for your letter. We will look at the matter explicitly. So that's insofar as the government of Guyana is concerned. I thought I should start off with that and not end with it. Because a good story doesn't always begin with a happy ending. A good story also begins with a happy beginning. and of course sometimes a sad ending. Now I've listened to my colleagues who have spoken, and they've spoken, I must confess, including the chairperson, very authoritatively on the matter. And I would like to also add my, as we would say in local parlance, my 2 cents to the debate. First of all, there must be a philosophical and a theoretical, ideological framework in which this concept of a new global human order is situated. And I will read what Dr. Jagan says in this book, what influenced him philosophically, ideologically, and theoretically to formulate the concept and to situate it in the given context. This is what he says, and I quote, "We need a correct theoretical perception of events, not only of the development of productive forces, but also of the relations of production and their contradictions. Piecemeal management is not enough, nor can everything be left to be regulated only by the market. Both the market and the state, as the World Bank has noted, have irreplaceably complementary roles. We need action and goal-oriented structural change based on the theory of history and the theory of society, a comprehensive strategy for the entire society is required based on the systematically elaborated rational model for the establishment of reasonable social relations." Very profound, and probably will take another lecture to explain what he means by that. But those of us who have studied the science, quite easy for us to understand what he was driving at, even though he didn't use conventional or orthodox language, so to speak. And so Dr. Jagan situated the call for a new global human order within a particular ideological, I maybe said theological, but maybe he did too, framework. Now, a new global human order, apart from what Comrade Morin said, implies that there was an old order. When Dr. Jagan considered this concept, his view was that there was world disorder. There was disorder in the world at the time. And if you could go back to the late 1980s or the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s, when this concept was elaborated, and examine what was happening in the world at that time, it was clearly a lot of disorder. But the comments are right, that this is an evolving concept because we have returned to world disorder. Look and examine the context, or look and examine the new global human order in today's context, in today's global context. It's world disorder. Look at the situation in the Middle East and the countries that are involved. In Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and in the war in the Middle East, the civil wars in the Middle East. What is all that aimed at? Look at Europe. Brexit. The whole question of the refugee issue has torn the European countries apart. Recently, the European Competition Commission discovered that one of the most powerful IT companies in the world was ripping off one of the member states of the European Union, Ireland. Billions upon billions of dollars or euros are not paying their taxes. As a result, the United States is up in arms because they're very upset over this ruling by the European Competition Commission to virtually destroy this company, which is an American company based in Ireland. I'm talking about the contradictions between the big monopoly capitalism. Fights taking place among themselves, not only for market space, but for dominance of the market space. The refugee issue created a number of contradictions among the European countries themselves. And Turkey, this is in the military alliance called NATO, where there was a coup recently, one of the most industrialized countries in Europe, is now having issues with member states within NATO. And now the Turkish government is building an alliance with Russia, because there's deep suspicion of the NATO countries ganging up against Turkey for one reason or the other. And so it's like this founder of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat, once said, it's like shifting sand. The situation is changing almost every day. And then we have in the United States another manifestation of looming disorder, where Mr. Trump last night announced that he's going to round up 11 million people in the United States and send them back to their countries. What is all of this about? 11 million people who are supposed to be illegally living in the United States are going to be rounded up. And he said he's going to use all the law enforcement agencies in America within 24 hours of his swearing in as the president. The first hour. They're going to round up all these illegals and ship them back to where they came from. And if they want to come back, they must go to the embassies in the respective countries and reapply. But come on, you know. If everyone in this room is a deportee and is sent back from the United States, the record will be at the embassy. So why would the embassy know that 150 people were sent back as deportees and give them visas again to go back to America? Disorder all around. And that was the context in which Dr. Jagan at that time felt there was need for a new global human order. And let me make this point. At the time when he first formulated this concept, it was not known as the new global human order. It was known as the new global humanitarian order. Humanitarian. And he, together with a battery of experts from the United Nations, from ECLAC, from CARICOM, put a team together to examine this concept or to re-examine this concept, to determine whether the word humanitarian was more appropriate to the subject rather than human. And the experts felt that humanitarian was not the appropriate word because humanitarian meant only dealing with crisis issues, earthquakes, floods, how to deal with those matters on a global level. environmental degradation. And so the word humanitarian had a different connotation from the word human. And when you read the text of what is written in the book that was mentioned by the chairperson, you will see the fundamental difference between what is humanitarian and what is human. And so he shifted from humanitarian to human, and that is how we come to know the book or the work as a new global human order. It was a question of economics, politics, ecological issues, and as I said, ideological as well. Because you have to be driven by some ideological appreciation of what the problems in the world is like. If you don't have an ideological appreciation of what is happening in the world, then you might as well have what our friend here is good in, which is a theological explanation of how the world is moving. Now, I agree. I fully support the idea that this war can be revived, can be updated, but I do not agree that we throw out the baby with the bathwater. The concept is still relevant in today's world because, as I said, we are back into a world of disorder. Somebody mentioned what is happening in South America, Brazil, and there are many other issues which I wouldn't want to get into at this point in time. But in every single continent around the world, dramatic developments are taking place. And they're going to continue to take place. So I am of the view that the ideas in the concept of the new global human order are still relevant. But you know, relevance is a relative word. It has to be seen in the context of relativity and context, because what may have been relative in 1994 may not be relative in 2060. What may be applicable in 1994 may not be applicable in 2060. And so as the situation changes, obviously we have to change, make necessary adaptations in the country. At the time when the new global human order was promulgated, we didn't have this kind of problem that we have today in the world. Take, for example, the question of terrorism. We didn't have it at the scale at which it is not now. Where bombs are going off, and not only what is called putting bombs on children, suicide bombs, going into wedding houses. At that time, yes, there was terrorism, but not on the scale like it is now. We didn't have ISIS in 1994. There was no ISIS. There was no Taliban in 1994. We have it now. And not only existing, but doing damage around the world. Forcing global leaders to have even summits on how to address this question. They have to, because after all, most of them are politicians. Every president, every prime minister to be elected, he has to be at the head of a party. And he has to respond to the population, to the constituents. And if they're not seen as responding to the population, the constituents, come the next elections, it's goodbye. They're all done. So it has to be seen as dealing with the problems, with the people, are not happy with. At the time when the new global human order was promulgated, the refugee issue was not as it is today. With hundreds of thousands of refugees coming in boats across the Mediterranean Sea, headed for Egypt, headed for Italy, headed for Europe, at great risk. We didn't have it, but we have it now. Serious, serious issue. You know, the thing is, when we look at these things on the television, whether it's Al Jazeera, the BBC, or one of my favorite television programs, Fox TV, you feel a kind of a distance from these things. You have to be a person who is strong in your humanitarian feelings to feel the attachment to what is happening. Otherwise, if it's not happening in Guyana, good for us. But as human beings too, we should be concerned, and that's what the new global human order is all about. At that time, the world, and most of the world leaders, were in what is called negotiations mode. Most of the world leaders were in what is called, I describe as negotiations mode. And this was manifested, for example, in the various global activities that were taking place at that time. Negotiations at the World Trade Organization, the World Food Summit, the hearings on development in the United Nations, the World Conference on Population, the World Conference of Women that was held in Beijing. So the world leaders and the countries at that time were in a mode to negotiate and find problems or find solutions to problems. Not much of that is happening now. The World Trade Organization negotiations have collapsed. There's no discussion going on at the WTO. I understand they'll have another ministerial meeting sometime later on in Kenya, in Nairobi. And there was also greater interest in things like international cooperation. We need for countries to cooperate at different levels. In the NGHO, there was a call for taxes on, for example, speculative capital. That is capital moving across borders illegally. Money moving across borders illegally. There was a man by the name of Tobin who had proposed that there be a tax on speculative capital. That has been overtaken in time by the anti-money laundering legislation in various countries, because speculative capital is now known as money laundering. This is capital moving across borders illegally, being washed and invested in other countries. And then, of course, the reforms of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, something that has been going on for donkey years in the global commerce. It is not moving, and it's a very important reform. Bishop mentioned debt relief at the time when the NGHO was elaborated. Debt relief was a big issue. And let me tie forward by just mentioning a short story. When Dr. Jagan was fighting for debt relief, there are two types of debt relief: bilateral and multilateral. Bilateral is with a country, like we had a loan with Russia, a bilateral debt. But we had debts also with the World Bank and the IMF. Those are multilateral debts. Those debts are not so easily written off. With a country, you can negotiate a bilateral debt relief. And so we decided to establish relations with the Vatican, during Dr. Jagan's time. And we invited the representative of the Vatican, who was based in Trinidad, to come to Guyana so that he can present his credentials. He came to Guyana, presented his credentials, and usually after you do that, you have a conversation with the president, with the foreign ministers invited to sit in. So I had the distinction, or the distinct pleasure of sitting in at that meeting. And Dr. Jagan was arguing with this representative of the Pope about the need for the Vatican to support the call for multilateral debt relief. And the good gentleman said he couldn't understand why the international financial institutions could not write off debts. And he said, you know what, Dr. Jagan? Are those rules made by human beings? Who made the rules? He said, once those rules are not made by the Almighty, those rules can change. And his position was quite clear. He couldn't see, and I think he was echoing the position of the Vatican. If these rules were set up by mankind, and they were not set up by the Almighty, they can change. And within a matter of a year or two, multilateral debt relief came to Guyana. I don't know who paid for it, or if it came as a matter of prayer, but it happened. And so most of Guyana's debts were written off. Jagio had a big role in that, in the Paris Club, where this debt relief were negotiated. So many of the concepts and the precepts in the NGHA are relevant even today as we meet. Countries in the north are now becoming more and more protectionist. Mr. Trump is committed to making the United States more protectionist in its trade relations with other countries. He's already said he's not interested in NAFTA. He's not interested in NAFTA. He wants better trade deals for America. Fine, nothing is wrong with that. But you can't want better trade deals for America and on the other hand, be protectionist. It's a contradiction. How that will be resolved, let's see. Now we have a very interesting meeting coming up soon. It is the G20 summit in China. Actually, it's going on right now. The G20 summit in China. This is where the industrialized countries of the world get together. And by the way, I understand the Chinese, who are hosting this meeting, for the first time, has invited a number of developing countries for the first time. I want to believe that there's a reason behind this. What is the theme for the G20 summit in China? Very interesting theme. It goes like this: towards an innovative, invigorated, interconnected, and inclusive world economy. Now it sounds to me that these words were very carefully chosen by the Chinese, because whoever hosts the conference or the summit, they determine these issues. Towards an innovative, invigorated, interconnected, and inclusive world economy. To me, each one of these words has significant meaning. China sees itself as a developing country. They've always said that. We are a developing country. Believe it or not, but that's what they say. And because China sees itself as a developing country, it has captured its whole approach to the global economy in this field. And that is precisely why so many developing countries have been invited to participate for the first time in the G20 summit. Inclusivity. They're being inclusive by inviting many of these developing countries to be part of the global negotiations. How can you, the industrialized countries of the North, sit among themselves in the club, determine policies for the countries in the South, the developing countries, without giving them a hearing? I think we know this word inclusivity here in Guyana. The word inclusivity, I believe, rings a bell. And this word inclusivity resonates at the international level as well. Interconnected. The importance of ICT in the global economy. So the importance of communications. China sees that as an important matter to be discussed at the G20 summit. They have 9 priority areas and 48 directives, which the heads are going to be discussing at that level. The new global human order also discusses a lot of important political issues that heads of state and government need to discuss. I just read where 30 African leaders met in Nairobi, Kenya, and committed themselves to the fight against terrorism. It's very important. Never happened before. 30 African leaders. And I'm not talking about foreign ministers, I'm talking about the leaders, the heads of states. At one meeting, committing themselves to the fight against terrorism. The developing countries have to be involved in this fight as well, and the countries in the North must appreciate it, because terrorism is a global phenomenon, and every country has to be involved in the fight against terrorism. But we have some dangers too. I just read a dispatch where, for example, in Holland, in the Netherlands, the right-wing political party, extreme right-wing, they have just stated publicly that they will ban mosques and that they will ban the Quran if they are to ever assume office in the Netherlands. This is the extreme right. Now it might sound crazy, but craziness sometimes could be a universal phenomenon. My friends, we have serious issues ahead of us. You know, the Pope was recently in the United States sometime in October. And I listened to all his speeches while he was here. And I was so impressed with what he had to say because it resonated with many of the concepts in the new global human order. And I said, you know something, let me write the Pope. Imagine a man in small Fiji Ring, Guyana, sitting and writing a letter to the Pope. And this is what I said in my letter, which is dated October the 13th, 2015, just after they left the United States. I said, Dear Holiness, greetings from Guyana. I have followed with great interest and am deeply impressed with your recent visit to the United States of America and the messages you delivered to the American people and to the people of the world at large during the course of your speeches to the joint session of the United States House of Representatives and the 70th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Your messages resonated completely with the call by Dr. Chedijag, and late President of the Republic of Guyana, for a new global human order. I'm enclosing a copy of the booklet on the subject for your reading pleasure. I do hope you will recognize the coincidence of views between your message and that of Dr. Jagan. The call for a new global human order now rests with the United Nations and is under consideration by members of the Assembly. Incidentally, it may interest you to know that myself and Dr. Jagan had the privilege of being granted an audience with your predecessor, John Paul, while we were in Rome attending the World Food Summit in November 1996. For me, that was indeed a memorable occasion. And I ended the letter to him. That is the kind of work we need to do to promote this concept. That is the kind of work we need to do to promote this concept. And that is what our party will continue to do. Because so long as a leader of the world speaks, and whatever he says resonates with the call for a new global human order, it is for us to be alert enough to take it up and write to that person, to draw it to the earth. I haven't got a reply yet from His Holiness. He hasn't responded yet because I'm sure the journalists would ask me, but did you get a response from him? He probably received thousands of letters from people all over the world. Like the Almighty, so many people are praying to Him. How He's able to decipher all these praying in all these languages. Bishop, how does that happen? So, this is the work that we are doing or pursuing in order for us to promote this matter. I've just been reading, there was a meeting called UNCTAD 14, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. The Secretary General has published a report. It's called From Decisions to Action. He doesn't mention the new global human order here in his speech, but when it comes to the recommendations, there are a few recommendations which resonate with the NGHO, and I intend to write to him about it because I know him well. We worked together in the World Trade Organization, and now he's the head of UNCTAD. And this is what he says: strengthening multilateralism, finding common solutions, new global human order. 2, supporting global economic governance and reform of the international financial system, new global human order. Different language. Strengthening global partnership for development cooperation and development finance, new global human order. Make the multilateral trading system more effective in the coming decades, new global human order. Enhancing policy coherence for investment with sustainability, new global human order. And finally, promoting a global enabling environment for technology, new global human order. So, ladies and gentlemen, I remain optimistic that this concept, advanced first by Dr. Chedi Jagan, supported first and later on by the CARICOM heads of government, because he was careful to take it to the CARICOM heads of government for their support. He took it to the Commonwealth heads of government in Cyprus, they supported it. He took it to a Rio Group meeting, it was supported there as well. And then finally, as a CARICOM resolution, he took it to the United Nations. And there it rests for everlasting life, and not rest in peace. R.I.P. We who inherit the legacy, we who have inherited the legacy of this man who had this vision It is our task to continue the legacy and to use every opportunity that we can to further the concept of a new global human order. Thank you.
With my busy schedule, managing that time of the month could be very challenging. With Protex cotton surface pads, I'm dry and clean for 10 hours. With Protex, I feel relaxed and confident with their absorption, leak lock protection, odor control, and thermal technology. Protex, the protection, care, and comfort you can always depend on. Take advantage of the extra savings with 10 extra panty liners when you purchase 1-pack Protex pads. Be sure to ask for Protex pads. Enjoy the comfort and savings. Distributed by Superfoods. Call 223-1034 or 223-1035.
Thank you very much, Comrade Rohi. Other than the author of the new global human order, I cannot think of anyone else who could have articulated better in any way, in any aspect, the relevance of the NGHA today. Thank you very much, General Secretary. I know time is going, everyone is getting hungry, but I shall open the floor just for a few minutes for anyone who might wish to say a few words, to ask questions, to make a comment. And I see PM, for me he's still PM. PM, Dr. Berry, Ramsran, 2 hands I see so far. May I give you the floor? There is the mic.
Thank you much, Chairperson, panel, members of the audience. I want to say that I'd like to add another aspect from what I heard Dr. Jagan speaking about as he developed this new global human order. And maybe it struck me because of my own temperament. And I heard him saying that this is not just to be a handout to people in the South and in the developing countries. This is to be a real partnership, a coming together where underdeveloped could work with developed together. So I think as the presentations were made, we spoke about Mr. Trump and his attitude to illegal immigrants. But I think in today's paper, I see us throwing out some illegal immigrants too. Maybe we're behaving like Trump. I do that because, again, from some of my own temperament and what I thought I heard Dr. Jagan saying at the time, we must see in NGO challenge to us, to each one of us. And we must see the NGO as saying that each human is the unit for which we will evaluate and have expectations of and see responsibilities, recognition, the unit that recognizes responsibilities and so on. So that we need to be as critical of ourselves as of any others. And I tend to think that we be critical of ourselves first. There are good quotations in the various revolutionary literature where we start really criticism from ourselves. And I go in that direction because that is how we make ourselves better. We were speaking about empowerment of us in underdeveloped countries. But empowerment comes from within us and us all together, challenging ourselves and challenging ourselves by the same rules and yardsticks with which we challenge the people in the developed countries. Of course, we respond in context of our particular circumstances. I can tell you when I heard Dr. Jagged talking about this issue of partnership, and I gathered the individual being the unit for which judgments are made, the individual, and all individuals, whether in developed or developing countries. The idea came to my mind, the examples, how could us in the poor and the developed countries be of assistance to people in big countries, maybe Russia, the US, China now, so on. And I think I recall two stories, fables about the lions and the mouse and the lion. And all of us, the ones of us who are old, remember twice, at least I recall, the mouse saving the lion. Once when the lion had gotten thorns into the paws and couldn't catch animals to eat anymore, and the mouse was able, being small, to take out the thorns out of the paw. And another time when the lion was caught in a net, and the mouse chewed its way through and got some of it. So that's what the view that I want to add to, and at the same time challenge my General Secretary. I learned that challenges are good things, particularly when they arise from wanting to expand and also to have the challenge of antithesis and get a bigger but to a higher level. But there must be a challenge for us. And I never like to start off with a position that someone is better or even better placed than I am. But I like to start out with a position, that person is a man or a woman, a human. I am a human, you are a human. And we're all human. And that is the theme that I got out, that came to me when I was around when Dr. Jagan was talking on this thing from time to time. Thank you, Mr.
Good afternoon all. Thank you for a good collection of presentations. I won't comment on them directly, but I'll say this. The genesis, and I appreciated this from Commodore Heath's presentation, the genesis and some of the antics we find in now with the present regime to continue the process. One thing I'd like to note in this regard, if you noted the history presented, the amount of years that it took for it to mature to a certain stage, we need to thank those persons who are behind the closed doors, like the Ensenalis, for example, the team, and to recognize them. It took many years to get here, almost a decade to get where it is. And this shows one thing that we need to note. First of all, the quality of the diplomatic service that the PPP civic nurtured. And you need to recognize what I'm saying now in this regard. We're being told that the PPP were a bunch of country people. They had no diplomatic depth. Now, for you to be able to present your case to the highest governing, international governing body in the world, and then get them to put it on the front burner, to get over 100 countries to sign on to it, you had to be able to do your homework. Those persons must be applauded. So, and it debunks the criticism by certain aspects, certain elements in the media, even now, and especially the present regime, the present ruling party, when they were in opposition, that the PPPC did destroy the diplomatic service. We did not, we nurtured it. Another example, of course, is the good work we did for 7 years working in the court that deals with the sea, the law of the sea, and we had a peaceful resolution with Suriname without firing a single shot. And we are being told, go send our GDF and beat them up. So I want to recognize that, I know. And the next part, I want to move on, our diplomatic prowess. The PPPC showed, we did that. We did that. We lost that as a country many years ago in the level of the non-aligned movement. Years ago, we made a spark, then Guyana disappeared. The next thing is this. The concentration of capital. We spoke about 1% of people owning 50 to 90% of the wealth. That is basically where the problem is, and Dr. Jagan identified it. That's why, for example, it started even before, if you look at his ideological groundings, when such authors, such philosophers as Lenin pointed out that there was a concentration of capital in fewer and fewer hands, which led to concentration of power and a distortion of democracy. So I think that we get in a bigger discussion here as to source material where it came from. So this is why, for example, the Tobin tax is so relevant. The speculation. You have to get to solve the problem of development. You need resources. What are some of the things that we can do now? What can we here, while we're thinking globally and we're acting locally? What can we do now? How can we mobilize to realize some of those points that UNCTAD 14 is presenting, is right now discussing? That would do great honor to the memory of Teddy Jagan. So what are the low-hanging fruits? We need to know those things that can be achieved. Capital, tax on speculative capital. How do we mobilize locally? I think Mr. Sam Hines is trying to point that out. How can we as individuals make things happen? How each one of us can act locally but still influencing globally. So I want to close by suggesting, coming out of this, you have to have a concrete action. You have to probably create voluntarily, very spontaneously, some chapter, some friends of the new human global order. So after these beautiful presentations, after the media would have reported, it doesn't fizzle out until next year or the other year. You have now, I'm told, with Commodore and her table, that there were efforts a few years ago to create a chapter, such a chapter in the United Kingdom. Probably we may here now have to leave with that resolution that we've made our little bit to making this happen and making UNCTAD 14 resolutions get the light at the human level. Thank you.
You're looking for a place to call your own, a place to unwind and relax in style. The Italian Grill, where friends gather, enjoy fine wine or a cocktail while dining in our casual atmosphere. It's easy to make any event special when you're among friends, serving lunch and dinner and using only the freshest ingredients. The Italian Grill. It's time to make it your own.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berry. Our General Secretary has to leave in 2 minutes, so please bear with me. I'm going to be very, very short, and I'm not going to repeat all that has been said because they have said it very well and in simple language that I believe was understood by everyone. I just wanted to say, before we move on to the vote of thanks, that the current world order, or I should say, this order, is facing many, many challenges. Social, economic, cultural, institutional, political, historical, structural, you name it. Multitude of issues, multitude of solutions being proposed with a multitude of stakeholders involved. It is basically a gigantic jigsaw puzzle. And unless we are able to fit together the pieces of this puzzle, we will continue to falter and probably eventually self-destruct. But as an optimist, I do not believe in the latter of self-destruction. I will rule it out. And therefore, I believe that good sense will prevail and that the framework, the new global human order is a framework. It's a model. There are different aspects to it, and those aspects and details of every aspect will change over time. But the framework remains. And that framework will eventually prevail, and we will have an order, a new global human order, in which our children and future generations will be proud of. At this point in time, talking about diplomatic depth, Dr. Berry, I would like to ask my friend and colleague, over 6 years ambassador of Guyana to Cuba, and I think about 9 years as permanent secretary within different ministries. I kindly call upon her to move the vote of thanks and to add her own few words. And with this, I say thank you very much.
Friends and colleagues, it was Cicero who said that gratefulness is not one of the best virtues, but it is the mother, the parent of all. So we are indeed grateful to all those who turned out today to make this forum a success. The administrators of the National Library, we want to thank you very much for the arrangements you make, and we are going to use and hire your center for future activities. The media houses, television, print media, radio, the photographers. I know you are the people who are going to share the message of what was presented here today on the new global human order. And you have your skill in bringing out and sell this message for this forum. The technical persons, I want to thank you, and on behalf of the International Affairs Committee of the People's Progressive Party, I am very thankful for you, the audience. Excellencies from the Federation of Russia, from Chile, our Prime Minister, our former Minister Minister Shadik, and former Minister in Local Government, Omar Hari, and former Minister of Health, Omar Berry, and I notice here our persons who are involved directly with the new global human order, that is Comrade Bishop in climate change, and you from various areas. I've looked at you in the presentation, and it is your rapt attention that make our presentation, electrify our presentation in this manner that was received, and I didn't see maybe it's a one or two attempt of yarn. And those who presented, that is PM Hines, to bring out that aspect, to bring out that humanitarian aspect of the NGO. Comrade Berry, who is coming out with a platform for action. And our head table, we can listen to Rodney forever. He is a wealth and encyclopedia of world affairs. And I don't know how he remembers so much. He told me only last night he was asked to make this presentation. And we could hear him on, if not for time. The Honorable PM, MP, and former Minister within the Ministry of Finance, pre-pastor, and I don't know the correct word, maybe pre-pastor, Frederico, Brazilian theologian and Marxist, in his discourse and interview with Fidel Castro, said, he quoted Fidel in the book Religion, Fidel on Religion, and he said that why should there be a clash between social justice and Christianity? He believed that Christianity, the work of Christ, with power are using and writing it in their favor. We've had recently, not only in Brazil, a new revolutionary theologian towards the poor, but as Commodore said, the Pope John Paul, and recently Pope Francis spoke in America about Christianity, the need to see the poor as Jesus was a revolutionary. However, we are blessed to have, as the PPP always had, various revolutionary theologians. We are blessed to have our bishop presented in such revolutionary manner. What can I say of our General Secretary? I was honored to work with him almost 10 years directly. He hardly smiles, but he gets things done. If something has to be done, it has to be done that day and not for tomorrow. And he was working under Dr. Jagan, Mrs. Jagan, that is our both presidents. And when I saw in the new global human order that he was instrumental at every stage in getting this work published into a book. I look at his forward. I'm not going to quote now as I've planned because of time. So we have here, the PPP has trained cadres. Among them, the best, I'm not one of the best, is our General Secretary. The legacy of the new global human order is going to continue. I'm not going to say whether it is relevant, still relevant. It is more than ever relevant. And it is we who have to now come up with plan of action. Because it is not today that new global human order is in practice. Dr. Jagan made that pledge at 1948 when at the Edmore Martyrs that he will dedicate his whole life to the betterment of the Guyanese people for their freedom. This book is not for Guyanese freedom alone. It is for the world at large. This is a legacy. This is a gift that he has left. And the cadres, the bunch of cadres that we have. And so, I already it's in practice. It's only for us to recognize. I remember just after 1993, Dr. Jagan, whenever there's a team of IMF personnel or the World Bank, he get them at Park Hotel on a blackboard, and he's explaining how the debt can't sustain itself. While we're talking about partnership and cooperation is new time, before then, we were calling for not paying the debt at all. And Cuba, Fidel Castro, was leading in that. And Dr. Jagan here in Guyana was propagating. In this new time, yes, it is evolving. We have gotten debt relief, and we have not gotten that by magic. It was the work coming out of various papers here that they elaborated that if you make 20% of your budget towards social services, you're going to get a certain debt relief. And Guyana, the PPP government has done that, and that is a kudos. That is a living legend. It is not something sitting under the table gathering dust. We are elaborating that. And this is what, although he's doing a lot, and this is what, like Dr. Jagan, we have to go to the blackboard and explain to those multilateral bodies how we can get maybe in other form Tobin tax and so forth as relief for people. It is true that women and children are the poorest, are the more hungry. Even Obama recently said that so many children in America go to school hungry. In an internet look at the new global human order, one person called it a socialist model. And blame Obama that he too is a socialist for recognizing the issue of hunger and a model for change in his country. So I want to thank all of you once again. I don't know if I leave out anyone, but and so forth. So thank you. And our chairman, our chairperson, that is my colleague, Merlin, who from my village in the quarantine, we went to the same school, and who had the opportunity to study in a long-term scholarship in Moscow, international law, has done a great job in having this meeting done a little over time. Thank you.